The setup. The silence was heavier than the old leather armchair Julian Vance was slouching in. It was 1:47 a.m. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the air thick and cold, the kind of dampness that sticks to your bones and reminds you that even the wealthy suburbs can feel desolate after midnight. Julian gripped his phone, the screen glare turning his cheap suit jacket a sickly green. He was supposed to be running algorithms. He was supposed to be preparing for his Series B funding round. That was the lie he told everyone, including the landlord who was filing papers against him in 2 days. The truth was simpler. Julian Vance was 32, 6 figures in debt, and his brilliant crypto scheme had vaporized faster than smoke in a high wind. He had nothing left but an inflated sense of self-worth and a burner phone. He swallowed hard. His mouth was desert dry. Across town, in a compound protected by iron gates and decades of discretion, the alarm system registered a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in air pressure. Judge Judith Scheindlin, the judge, was awake. She hadn't set an alarm. She didn't need one. Decades of presiding over the most ridiculous, heartbreaking, and plainly stupid human conflicts had calibrated her internal clock to the frequency of impending trouble. It was just after 2 a.m. A glass of water. A quick check of the security feed. Routine. She was tired, not physically, but deeply spiritually tired of the noise, the constant attempts at manipulation, the endless, tedious lies. Tonight, she just wanted to deposit the check from the syndication residuals, a massive number, too large to trust to a mobile app, and return to her book. She was 79, but she moved with the predatory grace of a woman half her age. She slipped on a bespoke cashmere coat, grabbed her small, heavily protected handbag, and walked toward the garage. She chose the unmarked SUV, no driver. Tonight, she craved anonymity. Julian didn't know her routine. He didn't know her schedule. He only knew 2 things. He needed a desperate, high-yield score, and the affluent area of Greenwich was soft, too comfortable, too trusting. He checked his equipment one last time. The customized overlay for the ATM keypad. The small camera secured inside a hollowed-out tissue box. He adjusted the angle. Precision was everything. He didn't know the exact moment the universe decided to pit his calculated desperation against pure, uncompromising judicial instinct. He only knew he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The forgotten context. To understand the sheer magnitude of Julian Vance's impending doom, you have to rewind. You have to understand the environment that bred him, and the environment that forged her. They were products of diametrically opposed philosophies. Julian Vance wasn't a criminal. Not yet. He was a disgruntled entrepreneur, a man who believed the rules were for the weak, and that technology offered a way to bypass consequence entirely. His life had been a series of spectacular near misses. Harvard Business School acceptance, withdrawn due to irregularities in his application essay. A promising tech startup, shuttered because he leveraged the company's funds to pay off a sports bookie. He didn't view these as failures. He viewed them as proof that the system was rigged against true genius. He lived in the world of the digital hustle, a world where empathy was a weakness and due diligence was just a fancy term for being too slow. 3 months prior, Julian had been riding high on a disastrous altcoin called Monarch. He'd convinced 50 people, mostly family friends and older retirees he'd met at golf clubs, that this was the future. It wasn't. The coin tanked. The funds vanished. Julian vanished too, retreating to a rented basement apartment in Stamford, fueled by microwave dinners and the furious consuming belief that he deserved to be rich. He hated the old guard. He hated the traditional system. And he especially hated the judges, the lawyers, the legacy figures who enforced the antiquated rules he wished to break. He was active on anonymous forums, leaving diatribes about boomer judges and legacy media dinosaurs who had no idea how the real world worked. He tweeted incessantly, hiding behind a ghost account, attacking the very principles of order. He carried this chip on his shoulder, the arrogance of the untrained novice who thinks the veteran is just slow. Meanwhile, Judge Scheindlin. She had been enforcing order before Julian was born. She lived in a different political and social stratosphere, one where accountability was the air you breathed. She'd seen the shifting cultural landscape, the slow erosion of personal responsibility, replaced by a whining entitlement. She found it exhausting. She had spent the preceding week in Manhattan, dealing with complex estate planning and meetings that involved 8-figure contracts. The noise level in New York had been deafening. The constant sirens, the polarized political shouting, the perpetual sense of impending collapse that hung over the city like cheap exhaust fumes. Her show was off-season, but her mind never was. She had a low tolerance for friction. She had an even lower tolerance for predictable stupidity. She looked at people and saw patterns. Julian Vance was a walking, talking cliché she had encountered thousands of times in family court. The entitled male who believes his charisma supersedes common sense. She often told her closest staff, "You show me a scam, I'll show you a person who thought they were the smartest person in the room." Tonight, she was tired of being famous, tired of being scrutinized. She just wanted to complete a simple transaction. The ATM she was heading toward was located outside a 24-hour pharmacy, a spot chosen for its excellent lighting and its low traffic volume late at night. It was an island of modern convenience nestled among historic estates. This was the quiet, unsuspecting point where the arrogance of the digital age was about to collide violently with the uncompromising steel of legacy justice. Julian Vance saw a weak spot in the system. He failed to recognize that the system had teeth. The arrival and atmosphere. Julian arrived first. He pulled the rented car, a black Audi he could barely afford, into the darkest corner of the lot. He didn't want the high-definition security camera pointing directly at his face. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, and cheap synthetic gloves that felt slick against the cold plastic of the ATM's bezel. The air smelled intensely of asphalt and the faint, sweet decay of wet leaves. The wind chimes on the pharmacy entrance made a tiny, unnerving tink-tink sound that was driving him insane. He worked fast. He pulled the tissue box from his pocket. Inside, the pinhole camera was perfectly aligned. He slapped the magnetic strip onto the wall next to the machine. He had less than 30 seconds before the external sensor logged him as loitering. Next, the overlay. It was a perfectly replicated keypad, designed to slip over the real one, containing a tiny capture chip. He pressed it into place. A subtle click. It looked seamless. Julian stepped back, catching his breath. He took a long, desperate swig of cold, stale coffee from a thermos. "Smooth," he whispered to himself. His adrenaline was surging. This wasn't about the thrill of the hack. It was about the sickening realization that he was one step away from utter ruin. He leaned against a pillar, pretending to scroll through his phone, looking utterly bored. He looked like every other 20-something waiting for an Uber. Invisible. That was the goal. 2 minutes later, the judge's SUV slid silently into the lot. She parked directly in front of the machine. Under the harsh, cool, fluorescent glow, the chrome on the SUV gleamed. She didn't hesitate. No looking around nervously. Her movements were economical, direct. She was here for a task. Julian watched her approach the ATM. He didn't recognize her immediately. She was dressed down. No robes, no camera crew, just a small, formidable woman in an elegant coat. But the posture. That posture was unforgettable. She carried herself like a highly effective weapon. He saw her glance at the machine. He tensed. Did she see the overlay? No. She touched the screen. She was initiating the transaction. Julian started walking toward her slowly, rehearsing the script in his head. The classic, Good Samaritan approach. The helpful stranger. He reached the edge of the light. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Julian's voice was too high. He tried to sound concerned. The judge turned her head. Not her body. Just her head. Her eyes, sharp and clear, locked onto him instantly. They didn't hold judgment yet, just cold professional assessment. "Yes?" The word was clipped, razor sharp. It cut through the damp air. Julian forced a friendly, disarming smile. "I don't mean to bother you, but I just watched a YouTube video on these older ATMs. Apparently, there's a big scam going around, where they stick a fake keypad over the real one to capture the PIN." He gestured vaguely. "I was just making sure you knew to check the machine before you put your card in. You know? Just trying to be helpful." It was a perfectly constructed piece of psychological warfare. He presented himself as the protector, the expert who knew the real dangers of the modern world. He created a false sense of trust, so when he asked her to reinsert the card or try a different key, she would comply. The judge was silent for 5 full seconds. She didn't blink. She studied his cheap suit, the 2 new sneakers, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped his phone. She cataloged the sweat beading near his hairline despite the cold. She didn't need a forensic audit to know this man was running hot. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice dangerously calm. She held her hand steady on the keypad, but she had not yet inserted her card. "No problem at all. Just hate to see people get taken." Julian pressed, stepping closer, moving into the kill zone. "It's really easy to miss the keypads. If you just let me check that slot for you, I can make sure it's clean before you proceed. I have a pen light." He reached into his pocket. He was smiling wide now. Confidence was flooding back. She was polite. She was old. She was going to fall for it. He took a step. That was the mistake. Use the incident, the virata. The judge didn't flinch, but her posture subtly shifted. It was the same motion a predator makes before the strike, a tightening of the shoulders, a squaring of the chin. Julian's movement broke the boundary. "Stop right there," the judge commanded. The volume wasn't high, but the tone was absolute. It was the sound of a gavel slamming down on the most chaotic day of your life. Julian froze mid-step. His hand was still reaching for the pen light that didn't exist. "Look at me, son," she said. She lowered her voice, making him lean in slightly to hear the devastating quiet. "I have been checking keypads for 30 years, she began. "Longer than you've been breathing. And do you know what I've learned about helpful strangers at 2:15 in the morning?" Julian felt a cold dread replacing his surge of adrenaline. He tried to laugh it off. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to prevent—" Silence. The single word vibrated with pure authority. He felt like he was back in middle school, caught cheating on a history test. "The way you approached me," she continued, her eyes boring into him, "was rehearsed. Your smile is too wide. Your jacket is polyester, and your shoes are cheap leather, but your wristwatch is a poor imitation of a Swiss timepiece. You are attempting to project competence while drowning in debt, and I can smell the desperation from here." Julian's face went white. He opened his mouth trying to formulate a defense, a denial, a lie, anything. She raised one finger. The diamond on her ring caught the ATM light, flashing brilliantly. "Don't lie to me. Lying is disrespectful to my intelligence. And I assure you, you are nowhere near intelligent enough to get away with it." She stepped back from the machine, allowing him a full view of the keypad he had installed. "You came over here to warn me about a scam," she stated, her voice returning to its normal, cutting volume. "Yet you failed to notice a glaring flaw in your own methodology." Julian stared at the ATM. What flaw? It was perfect. The judge pointed, not with her finger, but with the toe of her designer loafer, directly at the overlay. "This is a relatively new machine, son. It uses a proximity sensor for cardless transactions," she explained. Her tone now shifted to that of a disappointed instructor. "The original keypad is recessed by precisely 4 millimeters. Your little plastic cap sits proud of the housing by almost a full centimeter. Furthermore," she leaned in close, her eyes narrowing to slits, "this bank uses haptic feedback on the keys. Yours is dead plastic." She paused, letting the information sink in. Julian felt his knees wobble. Every detail he had polished, every late night spent manufacturing the damn thing, was annihilated by 4 millimeters and a simple technological update he had failed to research. "You didn't study the victim," she whispered, "and you certainly didn't study the technology." Julian stammered, I just wanted to help remove it. It looked suspicious." The judge sighed, a sound of profound, world-weary frustration. "You placed the skimming device and the camera," she declared. She pointed past him toward the dark corner where he had parked. "Your black Audi is sitting in the only spot not covered by the primary camera, yet it is perfectly visible to the secondary lens aimed at the drive-through lane, which you obviously missed." Julian whipped his head around, searching for the second camera. It was hidden high on a pole, almost invisible against the blackness. He hadn't accounted for it. He was a novice playing chess against a grandmaster. "You are not here to help me, Mr. Vance," she stated, her voice hardening completely. "You are here to steal the funds from my account, funds which, incidentally, are far greater than your entire accumulated debt." She pulled out her phone, holding it aloft. She wasn't dialing 911. She was recording him. "In 10 seconds, she said, her voice steady and lethal, "I am calling the police. When they arrive, they will find the physical evidence you clumsily left here. and they will run the plates on the getaway vehicle you so poorly concealed. The mask finally dissolved. Julian's arrogance evaporated, replaced by absolute visceral terror. He saw his freedom dissolving, not just the jail time, but the irreversible humiliation. He saw his future reduced to a line item on her next small claims docket. "Please," Julian choked out, his voice cracking. The sound was pathetic. "Ma'am, please don't call them. I didn't steal anything. I haven't done anything yet." He started to beg, genuinely terrified. He tried to pivot, not to denial, but to surrender. "I need help," he pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm in deep trouble. I lost everything. I was stupid. I just need a chance. I'll remove it right now. I'll never do this again." He lunged forward, frantically ripping the plastic overlay off the keypad, exposing the clean, recessed surface underneath. He grabbed the tissue box, the pinhole camera tumbling onto the concrete. The judge watched him scramble, her expression totally unreadable. The sight of this self-proclaimed digital mastermind reduced to an hysterical child in cheap gloves was deeply satisfying and completely familiar. "You don't need a chance, son," she said, finally pressing the call button. Not to 911, but to her own security detail. "You need to learn that accountability is mandatory." Julian dropped the plastic skimming device. He stared at her, horrified. "No, please. If the police get involved, my life is over. I need a lawyer. I need protection." He actually started stepping behind her, trying to use the formidable jurist as a human shield against the impending sirens. "I am not your protection," the judge said, moving smoothly out of his reach. She looked at his trembling figure, now openly weeping. "You wanted to break the system. Now you are subject to it. And I promise you, Mr. Vance, the system works much faster when you leave the evidence right on the floor." Julian Vance, the sophisticated digital hustler, found himself begging Judge Judith Shandlin, the embodiment of the justice system he despised, for police protection from the police he had just summoned upon himself. The repercussion. The police response was immediate and discreet. They knew who they were dealing with. There were no flashing lights, just two unmarked cars that pulled up 5 minutes later. The officers found Julian Vance curled up near the ATM, hugging his knees, muttering about his Monarch coins. The evidence, the overlay, the camera, the burner phone logging the attempted transfer, was right there. The judge gave her statement quickly, surgically, without emotion. She didn't seek special treatment. She simply described the facts of the attempted crime and the evidence found. The story was simply too juicy to contain. The leak didn't come from the police or the judge's team. It came from a young, ambitious dispatcher in the precinct who recognized the names on the initial report. They sold the bare bones to a local tabloid reporter by 8 a.m. By noon, the internet was a bonfire. The initial headline was pedestrian. Greenwich scammer busted at ATM. But then the details emerged, including the identity of the attempted victim, and the narrative instantly shifted. Headline refinement. The daily scrutiny. Justice served at midnight. Judge Judy personally dismantles ATM skimmer. The Financial Times. Wry commentary. Digital arrogance meets analog wisdom. Novice hacker failed to account for recessed keypads and decades of judicial acumen. The social media explosion. Julian Vance's face, a mugshot showing him looking utterly defeated, became an instant meme. The speed of the commentary was terrifying, fueled by the sheer satisfaction of seeing a self-proclaimed genius humbled by a 79-year-old woman over a 4mm difference. Tweets. Gavel gangster. LMAO. This dude really thought he was gonna slick-talk Judge Judy at 2 a.m. He didn't realize he wasn't talking to a civilian. He was talking to a walking, breathing grand jury. Surgical justice. ATM fail. Crypto Karen. Wait, the guy who ran the Monarch scam tried to skim Judge Judy? That is karmic alignment so perfect it hurts. She probably sentenced him on the spot just based on his poor choice of accessories. Jurisdiction now. The greatest line in legal history. You didn't study the technology, and you certainly didn't study the victim. That needs to be on a t-shirt. The sheer detail she noticed. The depth of the recess. The haptic feedback. This is why you don't mess with a pro. The repercussion within Julian's small, pathetic circle was immediate and devastating. His few remaining investors realized they hadn't just lost their money, they had been aligned with a cartoon villain. His burner phone, logged by police, provided a roadmap of his recent criminal activity. The ATM attempt was small potatoes. The real damage was the evidence of the Monarch scam, including fraudulent solicitation. Julian, sitting in an interrogation room later that morning, was a shell. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for a blanket. He kept repeating the words the judge had said. "You failed to notice a glaring flaw in your own methodology." The judge, meanwhile, was back in her office by 9 a.m., having completed the deposit she set out to make. She was already on a video call with her staff, reviewing scripts for the next season. The incident was a footnote. "Did you see the news, Your Honor?" her longtime producer asked, trying to stifle a laugh. The judge merely sipped her coffee. He was a fool. Predictable. It was over the moment he started reciting that rehearsed monologue. She didn't take credit. She didn't boast. To her, it wasn't a viral moment. It was a basic application of observation, experience, and the principle that if you are going to commit a crime, you had better be flawless. Julian Vance was anything but. The true impact of the story wasn't just on Julian, but on the millions who shared the tale. It was a story of hope, the hope that experience always beats arrogance, and that sometimes the sharpest minds in the country are still out there, paying attention to the details the rest of us miss. The lesson final months later, Julian Vance was dealing with the full weight of his consequences. The ATM attempt, while minor in comparison, had exposed the larger financial fraud. He faced multiple felony charges. The irony was suffocating. He wanted wealth and notoriety, and now he had notoriety, but of the absolute worst kind, and he was poorer than ever. His defense attorney tried to argue momentary delusion, stressing the pressure of his financial situation. The judge naturally was not involved in his criminal trial, but her shadow was long. Her statement, detailing the surgical precision of his failed attempt and her instant recognition of the deception, was devastating. Julian's tale became a cautionary one in the darkest corners of the internet, a legend about the time the Queen of Justice personally slapped down a scammer at a cash machine. The key takeaway wasn't about the technology or the money, it was about the gaze. The world Julian Vance operated in, the world of quick cons, deep fakes, and rapid anonymity, relied on people being distracted. It relied on hurried moments, poor lighting, and the general belief that no one in a position of authority truly cared enough to look closely. He encountered someone who had dedicated her life to looking closely. The judge did not win because she had more power, or more money, or better security guards. She won because she observed the details, the 4mm recess, the haptic feedback, the positioning of the secondary camera. She didn't trust the narrative. She analyzed the physical facts. She applied the principle of judicial scrutiny to the most mundane midnight task. That night, Julian Vance didn't just try to steal money. He tried to trick an institution. He tried to exploit the veteran, forgetting that the veteran knows every move in the playbook, and she had already written the last chapter before he even finished his first sentence. He left the encounter exposed, dismantled, and begging for protection from the consequences he had desperately sought to avoid. He learned the hard way that, when you play the game of justice, you are judged by those who understand the rules better than you understand yourself. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.